In 1948, the trapdoor opened in Sugamo prison. Koki Hirota died by hanging. He was the only civilian executed by the International Military Tribunal. But this end began 70 years earlier in a house covered in gray dust. Fukuoka, February 14, 1878. A provincial town of 20,000 people, far from the power centers of Tokyo. Here, Tokubei Hirota worked with a chisel and mallet. He was a stonemason. His hands were permanently rough, calloused, and white with debris. He carved public monuments. His name survives today only on a plaque in Higashi Park, listed among the laborers who built a local statue. In Meiji, Japan, class was a cage. A craftsman's son was expected to remain a craftsman. But Koki refused the chisel. He wanted the pen. He didn't just want to succeed, he wanted to erase his origins, to blend into the elite so perfectly that no one would remember the stone dust. How does a laborer's child penetrate the imperial government? By becoming a perfect mirror of the system. He studied with desperate intensity. He memorized the rules until they replaced his personality. The effort paid off. The stonemason's son walked through the iron gates of Tokyo Imperial University. The law degree unlocked the door, but the unwritten rules of Tokyo kept him inside. Why did the ministry value a man who barely spoke? Because in high-stakes diplomacy, ambiguity is power. Hirota mastered the art of the blank face. While radical officers shouted for war, he stood in the corridors of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. A severe figure in a formal black tailcoat, sharp contrast to the olive-drab uniforms of the military factions. He was impossible to read. He treated language as a scarce resource. This restraint fueled his ascent. By 1923, he was director of the Europe and America Department. By the early 1930s, he was ambassador to the Soviet Union, the most volatile border in the empire. He survived by saying nothing that could be used against him. The International Tribunal would later classify this professional silence as criminal negligence. Hirota's cultivated reticence collided with a new paradigm in the mid-1930s. By 1936, the fracture between civil governance and the military caste was total. The government in Tokyo retained titles. The army held the power. They operated as a sovereign entity with an independent vision for East Asia. Expansion became the only accepted doctrine. First Manchuria, then China. The cost was measurable. Military appropriations absorbed nearly 50% of the entire national budget. Civilian ministers governed under a shadow. Dissent was no longer a political risk, it was a mortal danger. The army did not require approval from the cabinet. They required submission. The opposition fell silent. The political tension finally snapped in the pre-dawn darkness of February 26, 1936. Snow covered the capital. Inside the private residence of the finance minister, the silence broke. Heavy leather boots stomped on the polished parquet. Officers of the Kadoha faction kicked open the bedroom door. Korekio Takahashi was 81 years old. He was an elder statesman, but to the imperial way, he was an obstacle. Age provided no shield against ideology. Pistols flashed in the dark. The minister died in his sleepwear. The hit squads moved with synchronized precision across Tokyo. They did not just target men, they targeted the institutions of civilian control. The Lord Keeper of the Privy Seal, the Inspector General of Military Education. High office became a death sentence. By sunrise, 3 top statesmen were dead. 2 former prime ministers were dead. The state did not just pause, it evaporated. Lord Keeper Makoto Saito, killed. General Jotaro Watanabe, assassinated. For 3 days, the capital belonged to the gunmen. They seized the war ministry. They turned the Sanno Hotel into a fortress. Who won from the catastrophic failure? The army proved it could switch off the nation. The emperor intervened. A rare direct order to stand down. The rebellion crumbled. The ringleaders were tried in secret. But here is the contrast. The rebels were executed. Their ideology became state policy. Civilian authority was shattered. The psychological line was crossed. Politicians realized that opposition meant death in their own bedrooms. The press went mute. From that week on, the military held total immunity from public criticism. In this atmosphere of absolute submission, Koki Hirota stepped forward to become prime minister. Koki Hirota paid the price for his appointment immediately. What was the trap? The army could now dissolve the government simply by doing nothing. The mechanism was a single legal amendment, the active duty rule. Under this protocol, the Minister of War could not be a retired general or a reserve officer. He had to be a serving commander on the active roster. This gave the general staff total control over the personnel file. If they refused to nominate a candidate, the post remained empty. If the post remained empty, a legal cabinet could not form. The government died before it began. March 1936. The document lay on the Prime Minister's desk. The text was dense, vertical columns of black ink. It reversed the hard-won democratic reforms of 1913. Hirota held the brush. The generals watched from the edges of the room. He signed the paper. The red Hanko stamp hit the page with a dull thud. The weapon was forged. The military no longer needed coups or assassinations to control the state. They possessed a legal veto. Defenders argue Hirota had no choice. They claim defiance meant political annihilation. But history does not accept duress as a defense for enabling a dictatorship. The International Military Tribunal later ruled that the difficulty of the situation made his responsibility greater, not less. Hirota's government collapsed in early 1937. The cabinet dissolved. But the man himself remained. He returned to the center of power, now serving as foreign minister under Prince Fumimaro Konoe. He wore the suit of a diplomat, but he was about to authorize the work of a butcher. July 1937. Shots fired near the Marco Polo Bridge outside Beijing. A skirmish. A local friction. Tokyo did not call it a war. They labeled it an incident, a deliberate legal fiction to keep international markets calm. But on the ground, the fiction did not matter. The cabinet met to ratify the escalation. The proposal on the table was specific: deploy 3 full army divisions to the mainland. That meant 60,000 men, 60,000 rifles sent across the sea. The official record of this meeting is clear. Hirota sat at the polished table. He heard the logistics. He understood the scale, and he said nothing. He raised no diplomatic alternative. He voiced no objection. The foreign minister signed off on the deployment with a nod. The disconnect was absolute. In the quiet office, the war was just paper and ink. But that silence in July 1937 paved the road directly to the gates of Nanjing. The consequences would arrive in December 1937. The silence from Tokyo traveled across the sea. By December 1937, the troops standing at the gates of Nanjing operated on that tacit permission. Inside the city, John Robb sat at his desk. He opened his diary to record the day. Outside the window, the heavy thud of artillery had stopped. The silence of the guns was replaced by a different sound. Not combat, just the screams of civilians in the streets. This was not a military operation. The violence lasted 6 weeks. Soldiers targeted everyone. Prisoners who had surrendered, women, children. Estimates range from 100,000 to 300,000 dead. 300,000 people. That is more than the entire population of the city where Koki Hirota was born. Nanjing had a population of roughly 1 million. Within weeks, nearly a third of them were gone. And this did not happen in a vacuum. American missionaries watched from the safety zone. German businessmen wrote reports. The international community remained inside the city walls. The detailed accounts from John Rabe and American missionaries landed on a desk in Tokyo. On the pages, rape, fire, and decapitation. In the office, a quiet man in a perfectly pressed suit. What did the foreign minister do with this horror? He processed it. Diplomatic channels worked faster than the news. Cables from Nanking reached the foreign ministry in less than 24 hours. A stack of urgent telegrams accumulated on the minister's polished mahogany table. Official protests from the Chinese government. Desperate alarms from the embassies. Koki Hirota sat down to work. He opened the leather dossier. He read the descriptions of the slaughter. He picked up his fountain pen. He did not call for an emergency cabinet meeting. He simply wrote a resolution in the margin. Transmit to Army Ministry. The paper moved from the inbox to the outbox. He asked the generals for assurances. The Army Ministry promised to enforce discipline. Hirota accepted the word of the military. He did not resign. He did not force a crisis. He filed the document and considered the protocol satisfied. The assurances remained on paper. In Nanjing, the guns did not stop. The bill for that silence came due 11 years later, December 23, 1948. Sugamo Prison, Tokyo, pre-dawn. The air is freezing. The courtyard is empty except for a wooden structure in the center. Snap. Heavy doors open. Rhythmic thuds on the concrete. 7 men walk toward the gallows. 6 of them are soldiers, generals, field marshals, men who spent their lives in uniform, commanding armies across China and the Pacific. The 7th man stands out. Koki Hirota. 70 years old. He wears a civilian suit. He looks like a grandfather, not a monster. He never held a rifle. He never ordered a charge. He never touched a sword. His tools were fountain pens, cabinet meetings, and polite diplomatic omissions. But the tribunal did not distinguish between the man who pulls the trigger and the man who permits it. The man in the suit climbed the steps alongside the generals. International law stripped away the immunity of the bureaucrat. Hirota became the only civilian official executed as a Class A war criminal in the Tokyo trials.